Greetings, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone on our virtual road trip to learn and become advocates for those women and girls who are left behind. I'm Sharon Fisher, President of Soroptimist International. The President's Appeal Road to Equality webinars have been exploring barriers to gender equality that prevent women and girls from reaching their full potential. Joining me today are the appeal coordinators, Ayushi Kandu from India and Olga Sedenko from Switzerland. In this webinar, we will focus on domestic violence, a global issue reaching across national boundaries and impacting all levels of society. With many sheltering at home during the pandemic, the incidence of domestic violence has soared. Today, we have 3 excellent speakers to share their stories and speak up for those women and girls who are suffering at the hands of someone they were supposed to be able to trust. It's my pleasure to introduce our first guest, Patricia Vargas, a founding member of the Global Network of Women's Shelters. I had a meeting with some of her colleagues last year from the Netherlands, and when this webinar topic came up, I knew they would be a great addition to our conversation. And then they recommended Patricia, my neighbor in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, proving once again what a small world it truly is. Patricia has had a long career in the field of human rights and the area of violence against women. She has served the province of Alberta as a human rights officer, served for many years as executive director of a women's shelter, and now is executive director of a Catholic Family Services organization. However, the Global Network of Women's Shelters, a global voice for survivors and the shelters that serve them, I think is her passion. They work to strengthen and unite the women's shelter movement globally to end violence against women and their children. Welcome, Patricia, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'll start right away with talking about the Global Network of Women's Shelter. What we are is, all the networks of shelters around the world came together, and we talked about beginning to be a voice for those women who were often marginalized. Shelters per se were not really part of the discourse. When we talked about family violence, it was always about the police, justice systems, scholars, but the frontline workers who were providing the service were often silenced. So in 2009, after the first World Conference, so leaders of all the shelter movements gathered in Ottawa, and we developed the vision, the guiding principles, and we formed networks, and they were representatives from all the continent, Latin America, Africa, Europe, Australia, and Asia. Those members had the task to begin then their regional networks. So we have the Inter-Americana Network of Women's Shelter, which was created after that. And we have the whole, if you can see the map there, the whole, sort of the Americas participate in this network. One of the things that they have done very interestingly in the, in COVID is how do women become leaders, or how do we continue to be leaders in the time of COVID with the work that we have with family violence and violence against women. And so one of the initiatives that they have is tons of women from different executive directors from different shelters all over Latin America get together and they mentor each other. And I've been privileged to participate in some of them. It's quite amazing the work that they're doing to support each other in this pandemic. And then, of course, we have the Asian Network, which also was created. And the Asian Network of has been very active, and it was one of the first movers, if you will. Taiwan was one of the first who was able to guide us through some of the protocols that we needed to put in place. And they just had a conference in October about, the impact and how do we learn from each other. And then, of course, you have WAVE. WAVE has been long before us. So WAVE is the Women Against Violence in Europe, and they've been an entity for the past 25 years. And they've been also instrumental in helping the global network. The first World Conference, so one of the things that we do in the Global Network, I mean, we not only support each other, but we also do major conferences. The first one did happen in Edmonton in 2008, and we had 51 countries, and it was in 800 members. It was a very grassroots conference, and was the impetus for the Global Network of Women's Shelters. Then there was the Washington Conference, which, again, it was, you could see now people starting to talk about how inspirational it was to be there with others who do the same work that we do. And also you saw how we could learn from each other, and we saw a lot of lights go up. People said, I seen lights go on the staff, and they were so empowered and validated to be shelter workers. Now we're proud of it. And of course, the third World Conference happened at The Hague, Netherlands, and the heart represented, sort of that we're coming together, and that's from the SIA.org organization, where the women are trained to be jewelry makers, and it was a big part of, they donated some of the proceeds. That was the Dutch government supported the Global Network to create foundation as well, and it was 1,000 delegates from 115 countries. And the last one that we had last year, and it was in Asia, and it was in Taiwan. And one of the things that we focus on is not just learning from each other, share their practices, getting to know each other, but also being an advocacy for different groups. And at that time, we certainly supported the experience of Hong Kong and the uprising and the sexual harassment. Many women suffer from that. And you can see that where representation from the whole world was there. The other project that we're very proud of is, and it has become so important and crucial at this time, is the Leela Project, which is, the COVID-19 really emphasized the need to have trustworthy, vetted, updated information on helplines that lead to the shelters. When women experience violence and they're not able to get the information from the usual referral source, in particular during the lockdown, it was imperative that there was somewhere where they could go and have this information available that they could trust. Currently, we're working with some platforms, so Facebook and other ones, to ensure that the updates of the information can be done automatically, because that's one of the, obviously, some of a big issue when it comes to keeping updated information. And regions all over the place are working really hard to ensure that we can, all the hotlines are vetted and accounted for as well. We have a lot of work to do. I know that we need to identify all those areas that have helplines and advocates. Advocate where there's none. We need to make sure that they do have them. And we continue to organize ourselves so that women and children have a safe place to obtain that information, regardless of where they are in the world. So I wanted to start with an email that we received from our, back in March. It says, "Dear all, I know everyone is looking quite preoccupied about Europe, in particular Italy, and you have every country of about 60 million. Yesterday, 20 days after we started counting, there were 60,000 people infected and almost 5,000 deaths. Since March 8th, the whole country, schools are locked down. We are so worried about those women in lockdown, and we're trying to reach to them. Um, Unfortunately, we were not prepared for this. Imagine the situation of domestic violence. Shelters have been trying to reach people, you know, talking about this. We are raising our voices and acting politically more than ever to talk about the increased funding that is necessary for shelters. We also want to make sure that we talk about the stress that women and mothers are in this society right now, and that we need to do something more. Violence is going to increase, and we are worried about it. Um, then she says to us that how, she tells us to get your internet, make sure shelters have internet, make sure that everybody is prepared, get your instruments, your iPads, everything, because everything will be gone when you need it. So it's so important that we're prepared. And then she says, from all my sisters in Italy, we're so grateful for being part of your network, of our network, so we can support each other. Um, Warm wishes, Marcella Peroni from Dire, Italy. So our first learnings were from Italy, and what they went through. So with that information, this is how shelters responded. Almost all over the world, we responded by first, we were always open. Um, some shelters were able to use hotels and shelters so that to limit, so how many people you had. Some people did a combination of it. Of course, there's a lot of issues with the expense of it, but the point was that we were still really open for service. There were a lot of COVID strategies around the world. Shelters had to include health procedures, protocols in order to maintain women and their children safe, not only from abuse, but from COVID. Shelters enhance their services to meet the needs of the different families. So, for example, as we talked about, we had increased staff, cleaning. We started um, in supporting women that may not come to the shelter with food security. As we know, food scarcity was a big issue. Computer connectivity, that was important not only for having that lifeline, but also being able to still feel connected, and for the kids to still get the school pieces that they needed to do. COVID-19 really mobilized the shelter. So we did move. There was already emerging things that we were doing, and for example, Australia and the U.S. were, really diving into the technology and how we use technology. So they were really quick at coming up with information about. Uh, how do we provide services in texting? How do we text survivors? What do we need to look at if we're doing Teams meetings or if we're doing Zoom meetings, right? So the best practices. So there was a lot of learning that happened from there. So we conducted several seminars and increasing the capacity of everybody who was participating, but also learning how the pandemic impacted different times, different people in different places. So a real learning opportunity. So we had, for example, one of the things that happened, as you know, with the lockdown, we knew shelters around the world knew they needed to be really vocal. So the network, for example, they have a really good hashtag, which was lockdown, not locked up. And you can see the picture there where they advertise all the message of solidarity, but also all the numbers. And saying we're sending the message of hope, telling women residing behind closed doors that they are not alone. You should do something. Don't suffer in silence. Call us. And so that was sort of one of the interesting sort of different things that happened. In Jordan, for example, in Morocco, they had similar national campaigns instigated by the shelters. So the shelters movement were really big in saying, don't forget about the women, you're locking them up. With their abuser, we need to make sure that they know that we're there if they need to leave. So the focus was to protect women from abuse and encouraging them to seek help. For example, one of the innovative practices that in that area was that because everything was locked down, but there was some food security. And so what they did is they put safety plans inside the cookbooks that went with those baskets because they know that would get to the women. So women were very innovative in how they approached this. In Korea, for example, when we moved to Asia, they started reporting about, look, they're talking about that there's a reduction but these numbers are really coming from the police. And of course, women are not reporting to the police because they don't know where to go. Everybody's locked down. There's a lot of fear. So there was a real push from all the networks of shelters talking about the different pieces. So, for example, they knew that domestic violence was increasing before the pandemic. So we knew that it was just going to be worse. And actually now the ratio of domestic violence counseling increased from 26% in January to 40% in March. So there was a huge increase in those services after when they began to lessen some of the restrictions. In Japan, for example, the Women's Shelter Network, one of the innovative things that they did was to start talking right away about how we need to provide supports for families. And really, they talked about they had to push the government because of course they said, yeah, families will get this much money, but only the head of the household, which obviously for them was a man. And so the push from the Women's Shelter Network was to say that that's not going to help the women. So it was announced then the government did change their mind, and they said that in cases of domestic violence, victims and their children who are separated but have not moved their residency, because you're locked up with your abuser, can receive benefits if they apply to the city office. So overall, our experience has been all over the world. Women's shelters have been the voice, ensuring that we don't forget about women and children that are left in abuse, and that the response to COVID-19 that this is a shadow pandemic, is the abuse that women are receiving, and that we need to have the same lens to it, and that we need to organize just as much as we need to protect ourselves from COVID-19. So that's my presentation. I really much thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Patricia. That's so helpful, and I hope as a global organization, it gives a place to contact if clubs around the world would like some further information on how they can engage in helping in this important issue. Our next speaker, I think, Ayushi, you're going to introduce.
Our next speaker is Sarah Gallardo, who is a Soroptimist herself. Sarah is a domestic violence survivor and advocate who encourages other survivors to speak up about their own experiences. Her own story goes beyond being a survivor. Her message is about overcoming adversity, defying the odds, and staying positive when the world feels like it's crashing down around you. With years of experience to her credit, Sarah Speaks Up since 2015, a non-profit organization promoting awareness, advocacy, and resources for domestic violence survivors and families in need. Sarah has also worked as the founder of the Veterans for Victims program, which connects the survivors of domestic abuse with military veterans who can encourage, empower, and support them through difficult times. Sarah has found success with her written works as well. authoring Hiding in Plain Sight, A Glimpse into the Reality of Domestic Violence in 2017, and she contributed her story to the short film From Trauma to Triumph. She is a recipient of several prestigious awards and accolades, including the Live Your Dream Award from the Farmington Valley, Connecticut chapter of SI Americas, the 100 Men and Women Award from the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the 40 Under 40 Award from the Hartford Business Journal, and so much more. Sarah has also been inducted into Marquee's Who's Who in 2019. A dedicated single mother who is committed to raising her daughter to be well versed in healthy relationships, Sarah is further dedicated to making survivors feel comfortable as she can relate to their experiences. She has walked in their shoes in a way that a therapist may not have, which allows them to connect and overcome their pain. Over to you, Sarah.
Oh, thank you all for having me. I thank you, Patricia, first and foremost. I didn't have a PowerPoint for today because I know it's more my story that I'm adding to this webinar than anything else. I'm Sarah Gallardo from Connecticut in the United States, and I am a survivor of domestic violence. My ex-husband and I were together for roughly 10 years. And, in terms of trying to leave, that was one of the most difficult experiences. And I know that is typical for many women around the world. And now with COVID-19 adding to very much of the stress that's being experienced, we're actually still collecting data. So once again, thank you, Patricia, for all that you added to this with your slides and your numbers, because, we won't be actually certain of how this will fully impact the domestic violence community until much after this has all blown over, and we don't know when that's going to happen. When COVID-19 first sort of was discovered, I knew before it even, caught fire that it was going to be an issue in the domestic violence community, because I know exactly what it feels like to be living with essentially your own personal terrorist. So, being locked down with someone who is, excuse the comparison, but for lack of a better one, trapped in your home with kind of a wild animal that you just want to feed and, keep appeased, but you really don't ever know when it's going to go off and what that's going to look like. Unfortunately, that's been the experience for so many women, around the world. And, just to speak a little bit about specifically reproductive abuse and financial abuse, because I think those two things are very pertinent during a time like this. In my experience, reproductive abuse manifested itself in the way that I wasn't allowed to take birth control. And so I was raped repeatedly and caused to become pregnant. And then once I was pregnant, I was abused physically even more severely than I had been. And what we learn about this dynamic is that abusers actually become the most abusive during two particular times. One is when their victim is trying to leave, and another is when their victim is pregnant. And that is because the power dynamics in the relationship have shifted, and the attention then goes on to the pregnant woman, and she needs more care and concern, and also the pending child, who will then get their partner's care and concern. And that isn't the dynamic that the abuser actually wants. They want all the focus to be shifted onto them. And in my experience, I had 2 miscarriages before I finally was able to give birth to a healthy daughter. And she's actually the reason why I ended up leaving that relationship. And so, moving forward, when I left my ex-husband, my daughter was 6 months old, and she's now 13, and she is a very well-adjusted and smart, wonderful girl. But it was extremely difficult over the years to raise a child with no financial support whatsoever, and no other parent support. That's a double-edged sword. So I didn't have to deal with the co-parenting question marks. I didn't have to deal with the manipulation of my daughter, which oftentimes abusers who still have contact with shared children will use the children and the legal system against their victim, and to further the abuse. But like I said, the dynamic then shifts, and sort of their weapons against them shift. And as coincidentally, that also goes into financial abuse. So if you are using children and the legal system against your victim, they are then controlled financially as well, because they have huge legal fees, they have childcare, needs that they have to use their own money towards. That means that, and what I often speak about in domestic violence is that abusers are trying to shrink our existence. They're trying to shrink whatever finances or anything that we need, they want to remove. And so they want us to feel trapped. They want us to feel sort of backed against the wall. And whatever they can do to create more stress in our lives, they will absolutely do. So and this is something that I've found very interesting, because I co-host an international webinar every Wednesday, and we discuss domestic violence from the perspective of people from all over the world. And, although we have different cultures and, backgrounds, ages, you name it, the experience has more similarities than differences. And people find that the dynamic is the same. Their emotional feelings about the situation is the same. And the way it manifests itself in their life is also the same. So, during times of COVID-19 in particular, COVID-19 itself has shrunken our lives in the way that, we couldn't go certain places, see family members, people have lost jobs, have lost income. And, this has caused a huge strain on the organizations, the shelters, and, you name it. So it's true what Patricia said, that these organizations have had to become very creative. But I know that, particularly women do not lack in creative abilities. So we have succeeded in getting the word out to these women who are suffering. And again, this is global. So whatever experiences I've had here in the United States, we would have to factor in the issues that someone else might have in Pakistan or South Africa, where they already have, food insecurity and healthcare insecurity, financial insecurities, and they're concerned first and foremost about getting clean water for their children and not having enough to feed everyone. So that's, I have found that the dynamic is worse, and all this has done is create a more stressful environment for victims and survivors, who, once again, this has just been used to shrink their influence and their ability to care for themselves and their families. And that's why the need for these for the education and funding around this this silent pandemic is so important. And all of those organizations right now are feeling financial strain, and they are lacking in the staff. And so if there's anything that I can really convey, is that, I can speak for a very long time about what it feels like to be in that situation. And it's terrifying. Of course, you get migraines and you get sore muscles, and you have, possibly, nervous system. I mean, the list goes on of how this can manifest itself in someone's physical body and also their emotional body. But we're talking also about financial and societal as well. And so this is extremely pervasive, and these webinars are very important, because first of all, it creates awareness, but also as a Soroptimist, knowing that our mission is to, support women and girls globally through education and funding. This is exactly what we are called to do. So I hope this has been helpful. I know we have a question and answer time at the end. So anyway, wrapping up because I know I have a time limit, and then we'll circle back on the question and answer time.
And I'm sure you're going to have some questions. Olga.
Our next speaker is Gigie Penalosa. She is the governor-elect of Philippines Region, Soroptimist International of America, past SI board member and past SIA Secretary Treasurer and member of SI Mandaluyong. I don't know if it's right or wrong, my pronunciation, but I hope Philippines cities are difficult to pronounce. Gigie, she supports a lot the projects of Soroptimist International, especially in her region in Philippines, and she contributes a lot to make the lives of women and girls better. And today she speaks about the Philippines project. Its names Adopt a Women and Children's Protection Desk, which is present in every police precinct throughout the country. So Gigie, your word.
Thank you very much, Olga. Good day to all of you, and a pleasant morning from the Philippines. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar to present our program here in SI Philippines Region for the prevention of domestic violence and abuse as exemplified in goal number 5 of the SDGs. This program is our partnership and collaboration with the Philippine National Police for the last 26 years. It brings forward our common goals to promote and protect women and girls against domestic violence and abuse. The partnership came about in 1993 when former President Fidel Ramos instructed the Philippine National Police, or the PNP, to undertake a project involving NGOs on gender issues. With the President signing an executive order, the Women's and Children's Protection Desk was created as an integral unit of the Philippine National Police. Reproductive Philippines played a very important role in having this police unit formally organized by strongly pushing for the following rationales that would improve the handling of gender sensitive issues by the police. First, was to have a dedicated venue for women and their children where they can properly report grievances, aggravations, and injustices committed against them. To provide gender sensitivity and a more compassionate handling of victims by having police women operate the unit. To allow police women the opportunity to have more responsible roles within the ranks, making them more engaged in protecting women's rights, while in the past, police women were simply relegated to insignificant administrative jobs. With this, we saw the emergence of police women rising from the ranks through the years, many of whom became generals heading the WCPD and other units in the police force. A year after that, in 1994, all police precincts throughout the Philippines were mandated to put up a WCPD unit. The mandates, therefore, of the Women and Children Protection Desk are to ensure gender responsiveness to police protocols and procedures in handling domestic violence cases, to have a continuing education and training programs for police officers to properly handle cases of this nature, and to collaborate with the community, the NGOs, the church, or civic organizations in preventing violence against women. In 1994, Soroptimist sealed its partnership with the PNP by adopting the Women and Children Protection Desk as an identifying project of our region to this day. And for the past 26 years, our local clubs are tasked to adopt a WCPD unit in their community as our partner in advocating for women's rights and their protection. With that, every club must enter into a memorandum of agreement with the unit that they adopt. With this pandemic, the MOA signing is now carried out with a simple virtual ceremony. In this photo, you will see the Chief of Police executing the agreement, witnessed by the Supervising General of the WCPD himself. And I'm very proud to say that the Lady Colonel on the lower left is a Soroptimist member herself. The role of Soroptimist in this collaboration is to provide public awareness in the community and schools, especially in disadvantaged areas, by conducting awareness seminars and workshops on the rights and protection of women and their children. Soroptimists do information campaigns on the presence of the WCPD in the community as their go-to when violence or aggression is committed against them. Because many women are still unaware of their rights under the law or are too afraid to report their cases due to intimidations and threats from their partners. We therefore extend assistance to victims who are at risk with free legal aid or medical assistance whenever necessary, facilitate a temporary shelter in crisis centers or safe homes, provide counseling and mentoring, give a scholarship or educational aid for deserving women or their child, just to let them get by, livelihood skills training opportunities, and employment whenever possible. For each part, the WCPD provides resource speakers within their ranks to support our information campaigns with corresponding reading materials, videos, and infographics for effective dissemination. A continuing engagement in the community with the local government, the police, and NGOs like Soroptimist are very vital in creating an effective public awareness about domestic violence and abuse against women, in particular on how and where they can seek help. Many of them are not yet aware of the Women and Children Protection Desk and that there is now a law to protect them here in our country. In 2004, Republic Act 9262, the anti-violence law against women and their children, came into force, giving our WCPD stronger teeth to enforce the law against domestic violence. This law is very specific about the rights, remedies, and protection of women against domestic violence. And in fact, last week, our Supreme Court affirmed a decision that marital infidelity is considered a form of psychological violence, punishable by imprisonment for a maximum of 8 years here in our country, of course. As we support the important role of police women in our society, we partner with the Philippine National Police in conducting a national biennial summit for police women held every 2 years. Our local clubs sponsor at least one policewoman to the summit by providing for their fare and accommodations, as some are not given their privilege by their office or simply cannot afford it on their own. The summit serves as a venue for the mainstreaming of women in the PNP to enrich their knowledge and skills as law enforcers and as a forum for national discussions on police practices, protocols, and gender related issues. And this summit is now on its 20th year. Many victims of violence coming to WCPT often bring their child with them. As children may have witnessed the violence suffered by their mother, they appear restless and agitated. So we help police women set up a child corner in the station where we donate toys, books, and games to give the children some space, some calm and quiet, while a mother reports her case. As the unit is manned 24/7, some clubs also donate appliances like coffee maker, toaster, microwave oven, or a TV set for the use of policewomen while on their watch, and also for victims to have some conveniences, especially those who stay overnight for protection in the precincts. The pandemic has brought serious dilemmas to women and girls. They are likely to be the more vulnerable victims of domestic violence and abuse because of dire situations at home like unemployment, hunger, anxiety, and depression due to the effects of long lockdowns. The current lack of access to services, support, and sometimes even the lean presence of law enforcers themselves have put more women at risk. Cyberbullying and online sexual exploitation have risen with the increased presence of women and children in social media. Even parents' lack of knowledge on the appropriate use of social media gadgets also put children at risk due to lack of parental guidance. Hunger is one cause of domestic violence in the household, and this is very true in poorer communities. Despite restrictions and limitations, many Soroptimists defied the dangers of COVID-19 and distributed food and rice, which is the main staple of Filipinos. And to this day, we continue feeding children with simple meals to abate hunger in depressed areas. On the other hand, ensuring the education of children is also one form of preventing abuse. We work on donations for our adopted school in one of the poorer areas of our community and successfully gathered hundreds of USBs for uploading the students' lessons, bond papers for printing their lessons as well, and also a printer. Because children in this school are so deprived, it is important that these materials are made available to them to ensure their continued schooling. Today, we are assured of a year's supply of these materials from generous donors. As a optimist, we say a big no to domestic violence. But even with the limitations of the pandemic, we know there is still something we can do to prevent it. With modern technology, we aim to intensify our campaign through social media via informative webinars. We will collaborate with public schools to present webinars, particularly on cyber sex and bullying that can victimize young girls. Intensify workplace campaign against domestic violence, and we're doing that right now. Push more vigilant enforcement of laws to protect women and girls. So as I end, I want to say that as Soroptimists, now is the time for us to intensify our efforts to help other women, especially with this great pandemic when more women and girls suffer from domestic violence and abuse. Our partnership and collaboration with the PNP Women and Children Protection Desk makes this possible for us, as we also continue to support our police women to become more engaged and enabled as protectors of the rights of women and their children. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you this presentation on domestic violence in the Philippines. It is actually almost 3 o'clock here in the morning in Manila, but seeing fellow Soroptimists from all over the world on Zoom after a long time is indeed a very happy moment for me. Thank you so much. Stay safe, everyone, and keep well.
Thank you, Gigie. And I want to thank all three of our speakers for their outstanding presentations. But more importantly, we thank them for the important work they're all doing in the journey to end violence against women and girls. We heard about shelters where a victim of domestic violence can find protection. We heard from a survivor who explained the emotional and physical feeling of being trapped in such a situation. And of course, reporting, which is so important. But underpinning it all is the awareness of these issues for both the victims and government agencies that can provide that funding and support. I hope those of you on the call today have gained knowledge on the global picture, felt the need to help those without a voice, and have learned of more ways to work in your local communities addressing domestic violence. I think Gigie's going to have the most questions because of her comment on infidelity being criminalized. I see there's a lot of comments in the chat box. The next Road to Equality webinar will be Thursday, November 19th, and this one is going to be a little different. The title will be Stronger Together on the Road to Equality, where we will be uniting our global voice with the impact of our Federation project work. This will feature each of our federations presenting on the work from their countries in their federations that aligns with our President's appeal, Road to Equality. And then December 10th, Human Rights Day, we'll see our last webinar before the new year. The date of December 10th was the founding of the SI President's Appeal, where clubs around the world make a donation to the International President's Appeal, and these donations can be made through your federations and will support Road to Equality projects.